Very often as physicians, we lead based on clinical credibility. We lead based on interpersonal trust and the energy that we bring to the table. But the moment you're accountable on a big budget, like big budget, organizational budget, on a strategic plan, on regulatory audits, or even board presentations, the gap becomes very, very visible quickly. At that point, everybody practically at the table has that credibility and trust. That's when you have to shine with your understanding, with your ability to strategize and move forward. And if you fall short, that's when you, as that executive, are automatically impacted.
And so how should an aspiring physician executive in that system achieve that time and that exposure and that on-the-job training, if you will, that's not in every textbook?
I think once you step into a physician executive role and you are part of the C-suite, you are part of the big bosses in a sense, that's a point where I personally think that every physician stepping into that role needs to do some introspection and needs to analyze oneself. That's why many institutions, the minute they put someone in a C-suite role or an administrative role, an executive administrative role such as that, they automatically align them with a coach.
Hello, and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and along with a fabulous team at the CMO Group, we bring you the most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. The CMO Group is the only physician-run, physician-led organization focused on chief medical officers and exists to transform how physicians lead. The CMO Group helps emerging physician leaders move from expert operators to enterprise leaders through a unique transformational process. Healthcare doesn't just need good doctors in leadership, it needs high-powered executives with deep medical knowledge. That transformation is the work of the CMO Group. Today's show takes a hard look at what actually matters in physician leadership development. We have one of the authors of a dynamic paper that looked at more than 50 peer-reviewed articles and analyzed hundreds of competency assessments to identify which leadership skills are emphasized most and which ones are often overlooked. Their findings confirm the importance of collaboration and team building, but also reveal critical gaps in areas like financial acumen, risk management, and executive presence. In other words, this conversation goes beyond theory and asks, are we truly preparing physicians to lead modern healthcare systems? Our guest today and co-author of Redefining Physician Leadership, a comparative review of traditional and emerging competencies and domains, is Dr. Dani Zoorob, CMIO of Ochsner-LSU Health, professor and chairman of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and assistant dean of faculty development. Dr. Z completed his residency in OBGYN and fellowship in pelvic reconstructive surgery at the University of Cincinnati. Not to be outdone, he also earned his MHA and MHI, which is health informatics, at the University of Cincinnati, and ultimately an MBA at the University of Toledo. And finally, the degree that I am most jealous of is a master's in educational leadership for health professions and higher ed at Harvard. And topping all of that, last year, Dr. Z was a student of mine and successfully earned his certification of completion in AAPL's Chief Medical Officer Academy. Dani, welcome to the show. So great to be back with you together again.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me on this show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. As we were talking before the show, I have remained connected with you and others in our academy, and it's been a real joy to be part of all of that. And do you remember that we actually created a rule after you called Dani's Rule?
You did?
Yeah. Remember when we went through all the different rules of being a chief medical officer?
Yes.
We decided one of them particularly fit you, and I won't spoil that for our future attendees, but we do have Dani's Rule. Now, do you remember?
Yeah, I do, but I have to say the CMO training that we got, the focus, the things that we learned, and the investment that you had in each one of us, honestly, it's awesome. It's rare to find programs that truly invest in the people who are in their attendees, and this is on a much higher level compared to other things. And so it was awesome. So I have to say this. I really appreciate all the effort and all the real examples that you gave us, so that you can really prep us for anybody who's ultimately either going to be in the CMO role or who is in that role, to help us deal with real life situations. So I just want to say that. Thank you very much for all of that.
Well, you're making me blush, and I don't know if the viewers can see it, and obviously the audience that is listening cannot, but I'm blushing, and I appreciate it. And it is one of the great joys of education. And I am jealous of your master's in educational leadership. It's part of that ripple effect of learning together and teaching each other, and then changing things in our small universe of control, but ultimately our universe of influence. So I'm really excited to find out what you have been studying and how you will share that with our audience, and how that will hopefully engage further discussions about physician leadership. So, you ready for this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, the article that I am referring to, for those of you who probably have not read it, was put out in January in AAPL's Physician Leadership Journal. And it really got my attention about, I use this phrase, redefining physician leadership, which is a keen interest of mine. And it's why perhaps I do invest so much time and energy into it. So we kind of have to begin at the beginning, so to speak. How did this work come about? What were you and the rest of the team seeking to explore?
So this work really grew out of the frustration that many of us in academic medicine share, which is we talk a lot about physician leadership. We have frameworks, we have competency models, but we rarely step back and say, okay, what does the literature show, or what does it emphasize? And what is it missing? Are those people stepping into those leadership roles really ready for that role? That's what we were really trying to do. We were trying to clarify, but in a structured review. So we tried to figure out, like, what physician leadership competencies are actually emphasized in the literature and what is consistently underemphasized. And then we tried to compare, like, we even put an empiric competency score that we tried to follow. And we intentionally used the AAPL framework that was set up many years ago, so that we have something that is robust to follow. But we went a little bit further because, the framework was set up years ago, and we tried to look for, are there new competence? Are there new things that current physicians need to focus on? So that was the impetus for starting this. And I had two great colleagues who I worked with, Dr. Dewan and Dr. Slonim, and I have to say a shout out to Miss Collins, who helped get us all together. She did. This work honestly was awesome, in my opinion, for me at least, as a person.
I agree with everything you said, and it is a moving target as healthcare is constantly evolving. Then role, responsibility, scope, all of that evolves, and therefore competencies may shift, right? What we had to know 20 years ago around medical affairs and bylaws has certainly remained important, but a whole lot of other important nuances have bubbled up, and I think you're spot on. Tell the listeners a little bit about this competency framework that AAPL set up. Is this a self-assessment that people were filling out in the past? Is that what you were referring to?
So AAPL put out a specific framework that consists of 9 domains, and those 9 domains are broken down into 36 competencies. And typically, the way you identify how you score, so theoretically, in each of those. What we did was we took that, we used the domains and the competencies, and we used them as the infrastructure to analyze what currently exists in the literature. We reviewed manuscripts and publications that are out there, but the framework itself is something that can be used by a person to assess themselves, where they are, and how they perform.
So you probably remember me stating this in our academy together. There's the person that you think you are, the person that everybody else thinks you are, and the person that you really
You
are,
really are.
right? You remember that?
Absolutely.
So I'll sort of break this down into layman's terms. I'm going to fill out what I think my competencies are in this AAPL framework. the literature may make a different set of competencies as being important for the role, what somebody else thinks the role or the person should have in physician leadership. And then you're trying to identify that gap. Really, how should we be that person where I elevate what I'm not doing well and reaching for what other people are suggesting I do? Does that make any sense?
Overall, yes, but we did use the APL framework specifically to identify the gaps. In other words, what people need to focus on, what they have not been focusing on. That is what the honest outcome of this study was, to try to figure out where are we deficient, what needs to be put in place to help promote physician leaders excel in their roles.
Perfect. So it's not only helping an individual, it's also helping at a structural level, whether it's AAPL or a health system or any other educational environment. We identify gaps. We need to close these gaps.
Correct. So the nice thing about this work is, yes, it was done through AAPL, but the support that we got through AAPL was way wider than that, so that we can help on a much wider basis. And again, it's not focused just for AAPL, it's focused on everybody and everywhere, so that we can help them excel over time.
Yeah, and I'm very appreciative of this. That's why I'm driving this point so hard for our audience. They're probably already distracted, wondering why is Lee going down this rabbit hole? And the reason, in my own opinion, is that we have not formally, as a profession, and the support of AAPL and health systems and educational ecosystems, nobody's really done this work with a legitimate. Yeah. So you're agreeing with me. That's why I'm driving this point. We tend to believe as physician leaders, we can adapt and do things, but there's actually a formal way to approach this. Go ahead, Danny.
You're correct in that. So I can at least speak for myself. You know, I had to go through degrees to get to understand a lot of this. Medical school doesn't prep us for this. A lot of this sometimes comes through your work at the institution, your engagements, and so on. We as physicians are taught to be collaborative. We are taught to motivate others. We understand what quality improvement is and so on. But and this was shown in the study. Most of us don't understand adequately what the payment models are, what health law is, how finance really works, and so on. But the problem is that infrastructure never existed. So I would love it if this is something that ultimately medical students in schools are taught to understand what is the payment? How do hospitals work? What are the payments? Why is that important? And the laws that are critical to that. So I think that will honestly over time will have to change. And it was just very interesting that all these articles focused on the same things as deficiencies and persistent deficiencies.
Yeah, you and I will likely have another episode and show together about what is that infrastructure and where does it begin and how do we enable our medical students to have a working framework of the ecosystem they will end up in. And at the same time, realize not all of them want to go into these leadership positions, and that's fair. But we are throwing them, into a very, very peculiar environment for which they don't have a lot of knowledge about, and at the same time, extract those that really want to get into that leadership role and advance themselves. And like you said, without getting 3 or maybe 4 master's degrees just to get up to speed. So I'm with you there. So let's come back to the paper a little bit and get some more details. So the paper highlighted some key findings around the competencies, and this is my extraction of it: collaborative function, motivation, quality improvement, but finding the opposite relative to finance, health law, just as you alluded to, the payment models, how we get paid. And do you have any immediate reaction to that wide gap in what you discovered?
So let me tell you how we did this, how we got to those to start with. So we were three physician executives who analyzed the data, the manuscripts. We intentionally analyzed them, each of us, and compared our results. we also additionally on top of that I call them companions. We used AI, we used a ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity, so that they can analyze the same manuscripts. And we tried to ensure that we aligned as physicians with what the AI showed us. And it was very interesting because it aligned perfectly. I don't think there's any publication specifically yet about leadership that used this framework that we used. Um, and it did show that collaborative function, motivation, and quality improvement are the top ranking competencies in the 40%. In other words, 40% of all the manuscripts talked about these and focused about on these, whereas payment models, health law, and differentiation, when it comes to finance, was something that was barely targeted. They were blind spots for us. So we're strong in leading teams and improving care, but we're very thin in how organizations survive and compete. We have not yet mastered at this level what finance, regulation, and strategy need to be. So I'm a good doc and people trust me, but that's not sufficient when you are in an executive level.
Yes, I've lived through that and you're living through that. I appreciate that. Do you believe that the things that we are underskilled at or unaware of, do these become career limiting in your career trajectory if they're not addressed? Any opinion about that?
I think they have a significant impact, especially as you go up the ladder. Um, Very often, as physicians, we lead based on clinical credibility. We lead based on interpersonal trust and the energy that we bring to the table. But the moment you're accountable on a big budget, like big budget, organizational budget, on a strategic plan, on regulatory audits, or even board presentations, the gap becomes very, very visible quickly. That's where that lack appears, and that microsystem that you are in, that you are protected by, you're on a much higher level right now, and your credibility and trust have already brought you to the table. You already are sitting at that table. At that point, everybody practically at the table has that credibility and trust. That's when you have to shine with your understanding, with your ability to strategize and move forward. And if you fall short, that's when you, as that executive, are automatically impacted.
Great answer and very, very simplified for our listeners. But that also begs the next question. And Marshall Goldsmith wrote the book on this topic generically. What got you here won't get you there. So we'll bring you into the room. We'll put you at the table. You have all of the right attributes and competencies to get there, but you need to develop more to continue to elevate both yourself and the organization. So the challenge, and this is sort of a vague question, is a lot of this requires time and exposure, not just advanced degrees. And so how should a health system or an aspiring physician executive in that system, how do they achieve that time and that exposure and that on the job training, if you will, that's not in every textbook?
I think once you step into a physician executive role and you are part of the C-suite, you are part of the big bosses in a sense. That's a point where I personally think that every physician stepping into that role needs to do some introspection and needs to analyze oneself. That's why many institutions, the minute they put someone in a C-suite role or an administrative role, an executive administrative role such as that, they automatically align them with a coach, for example. Different institutions do that. I think having a coach is great. I think there's going to be some coaching needed and there's going to be some mentorship. And people sometimes confuse coaching and mentorship. They're very different, very, very, very different. When I say coursework, um, I'll use myself as an example. Let's say I'm stepping into the chair role. I assumed this role nearly 4 years ago. I had my MBA. I did the coursework. I understood back then what the payment models are, what finances are, and so on. So someone coming into this role, if they're applying for such a role, ideally be prepared to understand and know how the data when it comes to finances and how it needs to be managed. You need to understand regulatory frameworks, especially that you're going to be dealing with the government and with other insurance companies and so on. You have to understand not to break the laws. Now that is coursework. That is part of the trifecta that's needed to help someone ultimately be successful in an executive role. The coursework provides structured, fundamental material with a shared vocabulary that, as leaders, they understand what those are. But then there's something else that comes to the table. You're sitting at that table with all the other executives. There are sometimes behavioral and influence gaps that some people don't understand or don't realize. Any system you're going to join to be successful, you need to understand it. Most of us, like I'm a urogynecologist, I'm very OBGYN focused. My engagement, and I can tell you a lot of my colleagues, are focused only on the department. Well, if you're going to rise to that executive level, you need to understand more than your department. So that's when sometimes colleagues, if they're offered opportunities to engage in activities outside the department, they should just jump on it, because that is how ultimately you get what's known as system awareness, and you understand how the organization truly functions. Ideally, align yourself with one or two people who can help guide you through the way. A coach is going to try to help you work on specific things that will improve you, whether it's executive presence, where it's how you approach things. Whereas mentorship is having someone aligned with you at your institution most of the time to help guide you through some of the processes and literally hold your hand. You need the trifecta. You need to know the basics. You need to have done the coursework, even if it's through certification. You don't have to get a degree. Sometimes it's just understanding the lingo, understanding how things function through certain coursework, then the coaching and the mentorship. Those three, in my opinion, um, I think are critical to help someone succeed, especially that we are never given, in my opinion, or most of us are never given the basis to be in the executive role, because we were never taught these things at medical school and through residency and so on.
So let me add to that for just a moment, because I used to hold a strong opinion that I've softened as I've aged and as I've taught. One thing that when I grew up, everybody had to sit in the classroom a certain way. I think we've learned over time that people learn differently. They have different abilities and skills and capabilities. And some people are right-handed, some people are left-handed. There was a time that in public education, if you wrote with your left hand, you got a ruler or a smack on the back of your hand, and they told you to write with your right hand because nobody should write with their left hand. That's the devil's way. That we have clearly changed. And I would add to this notion that not everybody needs to do a formal advanced credential degree, as you were hinting at that. But if that's how you're going to learn it, because you need to learn it, then you need to do that coursework in order to understand finances, for example, or health law if you find yourself in that space, and that's important. But there are many ways to absorb that material and many ways to get that information. We're going to hold that thought for 1 second. The other thought that I would share is that if you are in an organization that is seeking to advance you from a medical director level role into a chief role, CMO, Chief Quality Officer, if they are not offering you either the resources in terms of time or money or personnel for coaching, look twice at that opportunity, or at least try to get that written into your opportunity. I think it's an organizational mistake to take physicians of at least our generation and assume they can do the role without giving them that coach. And it's up to the individual to find the right mentor along the way. I don't think you can assign a mentor. That's a unique relationship. But would you agree that if you are given an opportunity to go up the ladder, that coaching really ought to be embedded in one way, shape, or form?
I 100% agree with that. So currently, in my role of Assistant Dean of Faculty Development, we deal with bringing on new chairs to departments. And some of them have not been in that role before. So we're blessed at our institution that chairs, typically when they join, they're offered the opportunity to go to specific coursework. Typically it's 2 weeks actually. That's done at one of the very well-known institutions nationwide. And for 2 weeks, they're focusing specifically on financials, on all the gaps that we mentioned, so that you can get them to succeed. if you're plugging someone into a role, you want their best, you want them to succeed, you want them to shine. And so if someone is going into an executive role, I would definitely, and I go through negotiations a lot with my faculty as well as with other faculty when they're going through their contracts. If you're going into an executive role, you need to have coaching. That should be an expectation. You should ask for, in my opinion, minimum 3 to 6 months of coaching. And most of the time, that will help you shine. So you need that. Um, you got to this position, but you need to excel in your role. So the coaching is going to be critical. Now, using specific frameworks to build the foundation. When was back in Ohio, I was at one of the institutions that put a lot of their star physicians who they ultimately wanted them plugged into executive roles through a CPE coursework. Like they went through the AAPL CPE coursework specifically, and it was paid by the institution. Institutions that give you the infrastructure, give you the support, give you the potential for growth are the ones that you really need to consider. If they don't discuss it with you during an interview, maybe during negotiation, that is something that you might want to stress. And again, as an executive, you want to have the trifecta. You want to already have done your coursework, your all understanding of the system, but ask for coaching and figure out if you can get a mentor. Those are things will help you excel.
I like it, and I like the easy to remember trifecta of getting there. Are there things that you encountered with the research and with your colleagues where perhaps there are certain competencies that need to be de-emphasized that we seem to be worrying too much or spending too much time on? Any comments about that?
I would stress less certain competencies such as teamwork, communication, and QI because we do them on a regular basis. These are foundational. That's the key thing about them. But I would over invest slightly in other competencies. I would focus on the curriculum that's going to be developed so that physicians can understand the economics and understand the legal literacy, the risk management, and strategy. Strategy is never taught. So those are things that I would emphasize. I would stress as well, and I would explicitly focus on is leadership presence. So the comfort with visibility, your presence in that room, that plays a significant role when you're working with stakeholders, when you're in a board presentation, when you're working on external partnerships. The leadership, the executive presence is critical. We need to rebalance towards business fluency, business risk competency, and leadership. Those are things I think that we need to adjust and elevate compared to everything else.
I'm really curious if you'll dive in one layer deeper about executive presence because you've mentioned it earlier in the podcast. Why does this resonate so strongly with you? Is this an element of the research and the work and the inspection of the literature? Or is there something else that you have observed relative to look? I mean, you walk into an OR, I think you, and I've never been in the OR with you. I imagine you carry gravitas and presence and people are ready and you call your time out and things go exceptionally well, as well as they could ever hope to go. Um, but why is that not translatable, so to speak, into a meeting room, a boardroom, a town hall? What is going on with that?
These are very different environments. Where you're in the OR, you're the surgeon, you're focusing on the patient, you're focusing on a technique, you're working with learners. I work with residents, I work with medical students. Um, that's who you're focusing on. You automatically earn your position by just being the surgeon running the OR. I personally think that we run it as teams, honestly. You have the nursing team, you have the physician team, and you have the anesthesia team working together to help come out, make sure that the patient gets the best outcomes. That's how I see it. When you walk into a boardroom, you're another person in that room. Again, you've already earned getting into that room. You've earned that. It's being in that room, understanding the lingo, and expressing yourself adequately. controlling the emotions sometimes that may arise. Those are some of the things that can make or break an executive, especially when they are meeting with other very high ranking colleagues who have been doing this for years. Things as such are things that we need to be very cautious about when we are in that boardroom. The other thing is the verbiage that you're going to be using. It needs to align with the verbiage that an executive is going to understand. Walking into an executive boardroom, you need to understand the financial lingo. You need to understand the operational lingo so that you can get your point across and get it perfectly, like get it to where it needs to go, like you're pushing the envelope in the right direction.
Yes. Understanding the context of the environment. I was just having this conversation with a mentor of mine yesterday, is crucial in leadership. And I think through our training, through osmosis and repetitive behavior, we get very good at earning our credibility in the OR. And at some point, it becomes normative and natural as to who we are and how the team reacts and how we shape. But because we aren't deliberately trained for 5, 10, 15 years to go into a boardroom, then there is some catching up to do to understand the language, the behaviors, the norms, the context in which you behave. And I had a fabulous mentor, a different one than I just mentioned. And I would encourage this behavior, and I'll share it with you and the listeners in just a moment. If you're looking at going up a ladder in an organization or seeking a new role, and you've established whether coaching is provided or not, you also might ask, will I have an opportunity to be invited into the C-suite, into the boardroom at whatever level I'm starting out, to witness and watch and follow you and see what you do and what the others do? I was very nervous, I will admit. In fact, I was extremely nervous the first time I was invited into a meeting that like this that I'm talking about. I was so nervous that I think the mentor picked up on it and said, "You don't have to talk. Don't do anything. Just take it all in. Next time you'll present, but take it all in." And I would submit that if anybody is going up that ladder, if they have a chance to get in those rooms and see what it's like, that is extraordinary. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
So I can tell you that I currently have a mentor. He's not at my institution. He was my previous chair. And he actually was the one who encouraged me to take this role, and he guided me through the process. Having a mentor guide you through processes is critical. He used to send me to some of those executive meetings intentionally to get me prepared for them. And we would sit down and talk about those meetings, discuss those meetings, not what happened in the meeting, but okay, what did you learn from this meeting? How do you think this came across? What would you not have done? What would you have changed? Um, Again, I'm very grateful for having an amazing mentor in my life who guided me. And I agree with you. When I went into my first board meeting, I just sat there and I'm like, okay, please nobody ask me anything and don't look at me, you
Yeah.
know? But it's normal. It is normal. You know, you're going to be, I'll use the word trepidation. I had trepidation at that meeting, but you learn a lot. And over, you know, you get used to those meetings and you start understanding how they run. Because nobody automatically walked into a boardroom and it was like, you know, ran the show, knowing everything from day one and so on. It is a learned process and a learned lingo. It's learned,
Yeah.
learning every day.
Yeah. Well, let me hit you with what I think will probably be our last foundational question before we wrap up the show. And then I'm going to summarize with you. Together, we'll do a summary. So I think I have this quote reasonably accurate from the paper that I described at the beginning of the show. Self management shows a paradoxical pattern with high self awareness, but critically low resilience and modest self control. This profile suggests that physician leaders possess insight into their capabilities and limitations, but lack effective coping strategies for stress management and emotional regulation. And the gap between awareness and resilience indicates that leadership development must address both the cognitive and the emotional competencies. So we've spent a lot on the cognitive side. How might instructional designers or executive leaders or executive coaches help deal with some of that gap on that emotional side? And I'll even throw a little bit of a curveball at you. Do you have an opinion as to whether many of us go through another level of an imposter syndrome when we get to an executive management level, like maybe some of us did when we were training?
Well, I will tell you this. The minute I stepped into my chair role, that imposter syndrome, kept rolling through my head. I'm like, am I really in this role? Do I deserve this role? How am I going to behave? Yes. So yes, 100%. Now, what the study showed about high self-awareness, but low self-control or low resilience and so on, that was a paradox that appeared. The paper showed that self-awareness is prominent. The physicians know their limitations. They know what they're doing wrong. They can articulate those limitations often very precisely. One of the things that appeared was that most of the people, based on those studies, have a very, very, very low resilience, and self-control is kind of like modest. Now, why am I talking about these? Those are critical. The paradox that appeared when it came to self-awareness being prominent but resilience being low, it's a paradox, and a paradox but for sustainability of that person in their role long term. So that's where the problem arises. So if this predicts that burnout, reactivity, and inconsistent leadership presence are concerns. How can instructional designers ultimately fix this? I think the coaches can focus on identifying the pressure signatures. I mentioned the pressure points. What threatens those physicians or those executives? Because that is critical. Breaking down under pressure is a problem, and then building micro behaviors. In other words, you identify that this behavior triggers you. Come up with pause protocols, or some kind of communication script that automatically de-escalates you, or routines that protect you. Most importantly, resilience shouldn't be framed as personal toughness. All of us want to be tough or tough. It's more of figuring out how you can manage your workload, manage your role, and ensuring that you have psychological safety. That's critical, by the way. And the higher you go in the executive role, sometimes some people, especially if you're new, you don't feel that you have psychological safety. So if anything, presence can collapse under stress. So resilience training is indirectly presence training. If you're able to work on that, that's going to be critical. So the paradox that appeared in our study, again, is about sustainability of that executive in their role. So trying to work on, we know that we are aware of our problems, but how do we develop the resilience? How do we develop those aspects which we're kind of like weak in, is going to be critical for longevity in the role that executive is assuming.
I'm going to draw an analogy and then I'm going to hit you with some lightning. We'll do lightning rounds. We'll do some rapid questions and answers as a way of summarizing all this. I think the analogy here is in clinical medicine, it really is taught to us and it is key to our profession. We're always learning. I mean, I remember once upon a time, the only blood thinner I ever had was something called warfarin or unfractionated heparin. And once upon a time, you might have actually held a scalpel before you actually got behind the console. Medicine evolves, the techniques, the tools, and it is a requirement that we have continuing medical education and we're learning and we're absorbing, even if we never step out of that clinical role. In leadership, it's the same thing. And I do think there are some people who hold a bad assumption that, well, I have the title, I'm VPMA or I'm CMO, I don't really need to learn. Pardon me, you're a leader, and one of the requirements of leadership, no matter how high you go, is to constantly learn and help shape your own learning, like how to better self-manage, how to reflect, how to pause, how to process. So do you agree with that analogy?
100%. I
Okay.
think one of the things that sometimes as physicians, some struggle with the idea of the concept of humility. I'll use that term, or vulnerability. one of those two words. I think we need to be vulnerable enough to realize that we need to improve. We need to learn. We need to stay up to date on things. Sometimes some people do it out of self-preservation and protection, but vulnerability and humility are critical to ultimately get into that stage where you are going to go seek further education and seek further improvement. You are not going to improve if you don't know what's up to date, what's new. And in my opinion, engaging the right platforms, the right channels where the data that's filtered to you has been rigorously assessed. There are lots of organizations out there, but as a physician executive myself, the one that has been most relevant to me as a physician is AAPL, and that's why to me, their meetings are critical. I'm not advertising or anything like that, but I'm just being honest. For me, that meeting is one of those meetings where I try my best. I'm going to attend, and I try to attend a lot of the sessions as much as I can because you learn so much. And literally, you have to go in as a sponge and learn and understand. And you have to be open to the concepts that are being given to you because very often it's the way of the future, how other institutions are evolving and how you can potentially improve your department, your institution, and help things move forward in the right direction. Because you don't want to be that institution that's way stuck 30 years back, compared to everybody else. And this is how we do it at my institution. Well, this is how the world is doing it. So you need to join us, buddy.
Agreed. Okay, so here's a couple of lightning questions. Make sure we got this right. We have a trifecta that we've established both in the paper that you wrote and in the statements that you made. And the trifecta consists of your coursework, getting those fundamentals and getting that language and getting that knowledge, coaching, and mentorship. Yes or no? I got it right.
Correct.
Okay. Next question. We agree that when you are navigating a next step in your role, going up the ladder, that it is imperative that you take it upon yourself to ask for coaching. Yes or no?
Correct.
And similarly, with or without a specific mentor, you do want to also ask, how do you advise me or how will you help me manage my headspace? How will I manage the things that go on inside of me relative to stress and responsibility? We want to ask for that when we go up the ladder. Yes or no?
Correct.
Okay. Great. So I think I got it right. I hope I passed the quiz. I hope our listeners understand what we've been talking about. This is very deep and heavy stuff. It is clearly incumbent upon the physician leader to have an open mindset, to see where their own gaps are emotionally, psychologically, structurally, educationally, and work with the organization. You don't have to do it all by yourself, and you're nodding in agreement. Well, thank you very much for sharing your energy, your passion, your ongoing leadership. I'll give you a last word before I give the wrap up. Anything else you want to say, Dani?
I want to thank you for hosting these podcasts. This is awesome because it helps me and colleagues of mine stay in touch, learn more, and catch up on other stuff in between when we go to conferences, in between sessions. So these are very helpful. So I'm very grateful for you hosting me and hosting other colleagues who are helping me and others as well stay up to date.
Well, I appreciate the great words. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. Want to learn more about how to be ready for physician leadership? Read this article that we discussed today and go ahead and connect with Dr. Dani Zoorob on LinkedIn. Obviously, he has a ton of knowledge to share with you. If you want to learn more about transforming your career and becoming a CMO, then connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll set you up with the CMO group and everything you need to know how to lead in healthcare. I love talking with CMOs and CMIOs and department chairs and professors from all over the world. So get out there, be a writer, be a researcher, be a leader. But remember, whatever you do, in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.